Good evening. Welcome to the special Board of Selectmen's meeting and school committee meeting for the appointment of a person to basically take the one position that's temporarily vacant. Roll call.
Roll call, all 5 selectmen are present.
Okay. Joyce, all yours.
Good evening. Welcome to the special meeting of the school committee. For the same reason, joint meeting with the selectmen. Thanks.
Okay. The process, which I still have a note on form of the candidates, was that each one will come in and speak for 5 minutes. Everybody here can ask whatever questions they want to when they're done. Next person will come in when we're done with that. We'll just, between us, if we have any questions internally. If not, someone will make a motion. We'll vote on a candidate. Someone who gets 5 or more, that's it. Any questions at all? None heard? Okay. Jennifer Bailey's first in. Thank you, Kim. We have a new job for you.
Kim's in charge of the door, is she?
Thank you.
Hi, Jennifer. Come on up. Sit right there. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Kim, the actual quoting for that job is a Tyler under the Elks. Okay. You have 5 minutes, give or take, whatever. Just explain why you're here,
Okay.
qualifications, etc.
Sure.
Thank you.
So I'm here. I've worked in education for quite a number of years. I feel like I'm getting feedback.
One away from you and then speak more into the other one.
That's all.
Which one?
Either one.
Either one.
I'm not familiar with this. Okay. So I've been in education for many, many years. I've worked in diverse settings, from private school to home visits, early intervention, public school, and I've had the opportunity to work really closely with a wide variety of students and families and teachers. And I've come to understand, I think, what makes teachers thrive and what helps students learn. And I want to bring that to our committee. I want to bring that to the kids of Wareham. Additionally, my husband has been on the finance committee for several years, and I've learned through him, whether I wanted to or not, a lot about the budgets and the town resources, so I'm aware of what some of the challenges are that we're facing, what some of the challenges the board is facing, the schools. I know what the resources are, and I have some experience, not experience, but I have some knowledge about that and some ideas about how to, some things we can't overcome, but how to maybe compensate for some of those challenges that we have. Kind of my spiel.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
And I did bring extra copies of my resume if anybody would like one. I think I got it.
Defer to the school committee for questions first.
All right, Chairman, any questions? So I just had a couple of questions, Jennifer, and you just answered one of them. One of them was, I was just going to ask if you have any experience analyzing or looking at a budget. So you answered that one. And if you've had a chance to look at our budget.
I've looked at it. I haven't examined it that closely yet, but I have definitely looked at it. I know that, especially with the new school coming, you guys have dealt with a lot, and I have some ideas about bringing in volunteers. I know at the last meeting they talked a lot about having parent volunteers in the classroom. It sounded like it was challenging to get that on a consistent basis, but looking at that. So kind of accepting, like, okay, we have limitations. We can't hire the paraprofessionals that we'd like to. We can't hire the staff we'd like to. How do we find other ways to get kids the services they need or that they would benefit from without having to pay? So looking at maybe community mentors, or maybe looking at high school students, maybe as part of National Honor Society can come in as like community service kinds of things. Mm-hmm. So those are some of the ideas I have for that.
Okay. And I just want to say thank you for providing such a detailed resume, and
sure,
it was very helpful.
I'm a speech pathologist. We're very organized. It's how we roll.
Thank you. Does anyone else on the school committee? Mary?
I do. So what do you believe are some of the strengths and challenges in our district?
Great question. So I think the teachers are a huge strength here. I worked at DECUS for several years, and I worked with some amazing teachers. They're just wonderful. The flip side to that is I think one of the challenges are, and it sounds like it's getting better, but one of the challenges that I saw and that I've still heard about is teachers not maybe being as empowered as they could be. I think that's part of the retention issue. I think giving them more money is great, but I think making them feel like, hey, we trust you. You know what you're doing. We're going to give you a voice. In terms of, bringing in curriculum and having teachers say in what curriculum come in, how long they get to try it before they decide this works or this doesn't work, that kind of thing. So I think that's a strength and a challenge. Obviously, the budget is another challenge, but I think another strength is really the creativity. I was really excited to hear about the project Lead the Way. I think that's amazing. I'm really interested in kind of globally having a new shift in education about making things more meaningful, making things more personalized and real-life applications. So I think that's a great direction we're going in.
And one other question I have, just because I'm looking for ideas myself. So as you know, we've lost a lot of families here in Wareham to school choice, to charter schools, to private schools. So do you have any ideas as how we can encourage these families to come back?
I've thought about that, and in the interest of full disclosure, I will tell you I have a son who goes to private school. And I've thought a lot about this and why we made the choices that we did, why other families have made the choices that they did, and I think one of the biggest things that come up is concerns about social emotional kinds of things, bullying, respect, behavioral issues. And that's challenging because we can't control how kids come in the morning. We can't control what their home lives are, what they've dealt with. So I'm really interested, and I wrote to Mike a little bit about this, finding programs to deal with resiliency and coping skills. So there's in particular a program called Mind Up that can be done by regular educators. It can be embedded in a regular classroom, and it's teaching kind of mindfulness sorts of things, but also here's how you deal with a conflict, here's how you deal with this. And it's doing it before the conflict comes up, so kids have those tools. So that's something I'm really interested in exploring to try to help some of those behavioral issues that I think are concerning a lot of parents.
Great, thank you very much.
Mike?
All right, welcome. And yes, thank you for answering all my questions in a lot of really good detail. And I hope you didn't do that on your phone. I hope you had a real.
No, I typed.
I hope you had a real keyboard.
No, I'm not good with my thumbs that way.
Just since you brought it up, I mean, you mentioned you had a kid in private school. Do you have any kids in Wareham Public Schools?
I don't, no.
Okay. And I don't begrudge people. I mean, that people got to make their own decisions on that. We had to struggle with it every year for a time there. That said, all right, I've got a prepared question. I'm going to try and ask this of everybody, when they come, so it's just prepared. All right, so and this is to get into, I'd like to get a sense of how much you value, public input and stakeholders and stuff like that. All right. In 2017, the school committee decided to change the 15-minute portion of the beginning of our meetings from, quote, public participation to, quote, public comment. The difference sounds trivial, but it's actually significant. Prior to that, the public could come before the school committee and not only comment, but actually engage the committee with questions and hopefully get answers. Now all they can do is offer comment, and we just listen and don't respond. Would you support allowing more involvement of the public at school committee meetings where people are actually welcome to not only comment but ask questions during discussions on agenda items with a reasonable time limit set?
Initially, I would say yes. It's something I kind of want to think about and learn a little bit more, but my instinct would be to say yes. I think we'd have to decide what a reasonable time limit is. I think that can get tricky.
A couple minutes.
Yeah, but I do agree that it seems, these are taxpayers. These are people who are funding what we're doing, and they're funding the schools, and it does seem reasonable that they have a right to ask questions and kind of get some answers rather than just sort of say something and it's out in the ether. So I think I would support that.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Nothing right at the moment, no.
Same thing, I'm gonna ask the same thing of all three of you. If you don't get appointed tonight, are you planning on running for a seat in
Yes.
April? Okay.
I am. I submitted my signatures yesterday. They're good.
Okay, great, thank you.
Sure.
One of the things, and this goes back to when I was in the Wareham Public Schools, 40, 50 odd years ago, what ideas would you have to lead to more ability for the teachers in the classroom to control the classrooms, to deal with discipline issues and so on and so forth? Because the common thread over 50 odd years of my life is, I don't want you going to school with, quote, those kids. And that's a big reason why I think the district continues to struggle with retention.
I agree with you. From what I've heard, that seems like one of the major issues. So not knowing what the disciplinary structure looks like now, I think that does have to come from the top, and there does have to be consistency. I know this is something we struggle with in my school district, that teachers will send a student out for various things, and then the kid comes back and says, well, so-and-so told me this, and so-and-so told me that. And so I think rules do need to be applied consistently and fairly across. That's a big start. I think teachers need to be empowered to feel that if they have to deal with a discipline issue or send a child out for referral, that they will be heard and not have the kid just sent back to them. Because otherwise, if they feel like nothing's gonna be done, they don't have power to do anything about it. So I think that's sort of the immediate term solution, and then the longer term is, again, bringing in some of those social emotional kind of programs. I know PBIS is in place. I don't know if that's enough. I think it's a great program, but I don't know that that's sufficient. So I really like the idea of these programs that teach, brain neurology. Like, this is what happens when you're stressed out. This is what your brain does. So kids can kind of know what's happening and then feel more like they have more control over it. And that's what that Mind Up program does as well.
Thank you.
And so I go to some of the school committee meetings and so on over the years, and it's always the issue, is discipline's always the thing that you guys are dealing with. And being one who has a child who's difficult in the school system, it is not an easy thing to deal with or get your hands around. And I feel sometimes bad for each side when I get there and there's various odd issues going along. It's very difficult. And I don't expect you to have all the answers for that. So, it's okay because it's been working a long time. But it is the reason, I think, overall, they have inclusion, which they didn't have some time ago. They used to send children out to different places, and they didn't do inclusion like they do now. And that's part of the problem, I think, with the reason why the discipline levels are all different. You know what I mean? They're all in different places. And it's just the way it is. Money has made it financially, I think, more inclusionary. It has to be more inclusionary. But I like what I heard from you, and I like how you had an idea of including into their curriculum something to teach kids to try to keep control of themselves, which is a difficult thing because a lot of them don't learn that at home. And I really like that a lot. So I just want you to know that. I listened to that, and it sounded good to me. So.
And I've really tried to think a lot about, okay, here are the challenges that we have. Here's what we control. Here's what we can't. It's sort of that recognizing the things we can't control, we have to deal with. The things that we maybe can do something about, let's do it. And part of why my son is in private school is because he's also what you might call spirited. So I understand the difficult part. It was both for him and for them.
Yes, my child is spirited as well.
Yes. It's entertaining.
It's a good word.
Yeah,
Spirited.
Gotta write that down.
It's never boring. I'll give him that.
That's a really good word, spirited.
I've been on the receiving end of those, teacher phone calls that nobody wants to get.
Well, it's funny because I had quite a few children go through Wareham schools. As a matter of fact, all 8 of my children at some point have been in Wareham school systems in one time or another. And spirited is sort of been reserved for my last child. The others seem to go through with no problems, and of course that's the issue as well. Some go through no problem, then you have one, and there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason for it sometimes. So you can't always blame it on the parents either, because there's just certain things that take place in growth and so on and so forth. So it's a very difficult situation, and I know how they struggle with it all the time.
Yep.
And I just appreciate you having some thought about it, that's all.
Thank you.
I have a question, one you may or may not be able to answer, which is fine.
Okay.
Sorry. It's off. How's that, Bob?
Oh, that's better. Thank you.
You're welcome, dear. The issue we have sitting here, the 9 of us, eventually be 10 again, is that we have funding issues, obviously. We have, say, X number of dollars coming in. It's always a distribution. We're trying to figure a way to make the program sustainable and work. And the question I have is, do you have any feelings one way or the other about basically coming up with a formula for how money comes into town and how the different departments, because the school department is one of the departments, gets done, where we have a fixed percentage and everybody has to live within a budget? And if you can't answer it, it's okay.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to say I can't answer that one. I think I'm not quite sure exactly what the question is. And
It's a matter of, say the town would say gets $30 million in revenue. We would break out a percentage,
allocation.
one versus allocation, and that's how it would work, and everybody would have to work with what the allocation is.
I think it depends on the year to year. I think you have to look at, it's that really tricky balance of, yes, we need more teachers, but yes, we need a fire truck. You know, it's sort of looking at what those most emergent needs are and what resources look like down the line, what can wait, what can't. I think there are no easy answers, unfortunately.
It's not.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Okay,
Thank you.
well done.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
When you go back out, ask
So can
April
I-
to come in.
Thank you.
Can I have another question?
No.
That was it?
Unless, do you want another one, seriously?
Yeah, I do.
Absolutely, okay.
Come on down.
Sorry.
That's okay.
All right,
Back down.
Okay.
all right, gotta be fast here, jeez. All right. All right, so, again, it's just prepared. All right, so, and it's kind of long-winded, I apologize. All right, Wareham actually has two school systems. There is Wareham Public Schools, but there is also Upper Cape Cod Regional Technical School where students choose to go to learn a vocation. While it physically sits in the town of Bourne, Upper Cape is in fact Wareham's vocational school, funded by our tax dollars and complete with 2 school committee members selected by Wareham voters, just like we are. In the past, staff from Upper Cape have been allowed to come to the Wareham Public Schools during the school day to share with 8th graders the opportunities offered at Upper Cape for those who might be interested in choosing a vocational path. That was a source of friction because it was perceived by some as Wareham Public Schools losing kids to another school like we do with school choice, all right? Even though that comparison is somewhat apples and oranges due to the previously stated reasons. Ultimately, the staff from Upper Cape were restricted to coming into Wareham Public Schools during only after-school hours to discuss their offerings. As a result, Upper Cape stopped coming at all and now only send out mailings instead. That's a disservice to those kids who would benefit from learning more about opportunities geared toward them that could impact their whole lives. Considering that we allow folks to come in during the day to make presentations on other worthwhile things such as, the dangers of substance abuse, or even we send out kids during the day to visit area colleges, would you support re-allowing Upper Cape staff to come in one day during the school day to describe what is offered at that school?
I do. And I do understand the sort of friction that it does make us lose some kids. But I think if we're looking at what's best for the kids, I would support that. I think in some ways it's unfair to have them come only after school where kids might not be able to stay after. They might not have access to that information. Even at the district I work at, it's Old Rochester, but we have Old Colony come in, we have the kids go to Upper Cape, and I really think it does do a service to those kids. That being said, that's a kind of a short-term thing. Yes, I do think they should come in to be able to tell kids what they have, but I'm also interested in looking at what we can do more internally for vocational opportunities. So how can we partner with communities? How can we get, internships with local businesses so kids maybe don't feel like they have to leave, but can maybe supplement what they're getting here? That's something I've been thinking about.
Are we done now, Mike? On the next couple, Mike, try and do all your questions, get them done, please.
Say that again?
Please try and do your questions all at once next time.
All at once?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, don't be afraid.
Okay.
Jump right in
All
there.
right, all right, so, again, so you were there at the last school committee meeting, you were all there, which is great. And so you saw the presentation on, social promotion, retentions and such, right? So this question is geared toward that, all right? So now, well, I think we can agree that retentions do need to be done on a case-by-case basis.
Can I just interrupt you, Mike? I don't think this question is really appropriate.
Why?
I
You
mean,
don't even,
because
I haven't even
you're-
asked it.
I know, but that was just a really leading statement that you just made. Does anyone else agree?
Well, how was leading about it?
Well, I think we can agree. I mean, she's here applying for a position, and you're implying that she should agree with you.
All right, I'll say, while I agree, while I believe, okay, while I believe retentions do need to be done on a case-by-case basis, the fact is that over the course of the past 3 years, and some 3,000 students in grades 3 through 8, Wareham Public Schools has only retained 3 students in that time, 3 students. However, when
I'm
these...
going to interrupt again. Mike, it's leading.
Whatever,
Does anyone else agree with me?
This is really for your side to do. I don't think the Board of Selectmen are going to have input on this.
Okay. Okay.
May I?
I think it's a leading question, and I don't think it's appropriate. We're looking for someone to fill a position for the next 2 months.
I'm looking for answers on
I understand, and we all are, but I think your questions are more appropriate for a candidates night than for an interview to fill a 2-month opening. So I guess I'd ask the other members of the school committee if they agree or disagree. I'm not opposed to you asking questions.
Of course, of course you are. You won't even let me ask the question.
I don't know if I'm opposed to it,
Yeah,
but I
I
think it's something we know your stance on and we've gone over, so now you're just reiterating it to somebody
I'd
who.
like to know what they think on it.
I mean, that's fine with me. I mean, you know how I think on it,
Yeah.
so.
Okay, I just want us to remember that we are here to fill a 2-month opening, not to, and Jennifer, this is in no
Nope, I
way
understand.
reflective of you at
I
all.
understand.
So I'm sorry that this is happening while you're here, I'm sorry.
Okay, so don't answer if you don't feel like you should, all right?
Okay.
And I won't take that negatively in any way.
Okay.
All right, so while I believe retentions do need to be done on a case-by-case basis, the fact is that over the course of the past 3 years, and some 3,000 students in grades 3 through 8, Wareham Public Schools has only retained 3 students in that time. However, when these students reach the high school, many are retained in their first year, some 20 plus or 30 plus in some years. Yet the middle school, for example, remains in the bottom 20 percentile when compared with the rest of the state. Would you agree that Wareham Public Schools is systemically promoting kids to the next grade who have not learned the material, and what would you do?
I don't have enough information to
Okay.
answer that.
I respect that.
Okay, so again, thank you very much. Are there any other questions? No.
Any other questions of the board again?
No, sir.
Thanks.
This time when I stand up, I'm standing up for real, so.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You too.
Hi, April.
Hello.
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you. I'm going to untangle myself here. Sorry.
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
You're all set to go.
Okay, so I did prepare something to read to make myself a little bit more on task, so I don't kind of dive off into 1,000 different directions, and there are some of you that don't have any idea who I am. So my name is April Rossi, and I am running for the 2-year term of the school committee, as well as seeking this interim position for the current opening. I've been a Wareham resident since 2010, and I work at the Taradine Studio and Onset. I've been involved in Wareham youth organizations for several years, both in board capacities as well as volunteering. I was a Deacon's Elementary PTA board member and on their executive board for 3 years as their corresponding secretary. I was a member during the successful transition to combine the Deacon's and Minot Forest PTAs to become the Wareham Elementary PTA. I'm also a current PTA member and volunteer at events whenever my schedule permits. I was a board member for the Wareham Tigers Athletic Association for 6 years and was the cheer coordinating director from 2016 until this January. I was also a cheerleading coach for 5 years, coaching both sideline and competition cheer. I was on the board for Wareham Childcare and aided in their sale and acquisition by Cape Cod Child Development, after which that board was dissolved. I've been involved heavily with the Boys and Girls Club in Wareham, chaperoning events, as well as spending days off working in small groups of young ladies, teaching braiding and bracelet making and other activities. I've been a substitute teacher at Wareham Middle School for 2 years, and my son is currently the first class of 8th graders at Wareham High School. I've also been involved with Global Education Program through the Office of Beyond School Time. I've hosted 3 exchange students from China and will host again in February. And my son has also been a short-term study abroad student and spent a week in Beijing through this amazing program. I see great potential in the town and the schools and have gotten to know a lot of kids, parents, and teachers through my volunteer work as well as being a substitute. That said, I feel that having worked in such areas and having a student enrolled in the district, I have a unique perspective. I'm able to see all angles of an issue and have the ability to utilize out-of-the-box thinking to bring all sides to see more clearly a common goal. My objective as a school committee member is for the betterment of the schools and to have the ability to question and hopefully change these policies and procedures that have thus far not been helpful in securing a solid foundation for our kids. Through no fault of the current school committee or administration, I see dated policies that perhaps need reorganization in an era so heavily rooted in technology. Communication and transparency are keys to not only helping kids succeed, but also in garnering parent support, which is a key piece in every child's ability to succeed. Without support at home, our schools face a serious roadblock, and sadly that affects the very students we're so intent on helping. I hope to bring fresh insight and a passion for the town I love to the school committee, should I be chosen for the position. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm done reading now.
Are there any questions of the school committee?
Sure.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Good, Lori, how are you?
So you talked about policies and procedures that you find outdated. Is there any specific ones that like come to mind for you that?
Not specifically, although one that I find a little, not necessarily concerning, it's not the word that I'm trying to grab for right now, but the open forum at the beginning of the meeting, I feel that, I know that obviously time becomes an issue with having some sort of participation or clarification questions peppered in throughout the meeting. But I also feel that there are some questions that should be brought up before a vote is made. There are instances where going along with the agenda that people watching or sitting in the seats attending the meeting could want clarification or could even bring a different mindset or a different view on it that maybe the school committee was not previously thinking, and can kind of, it could sway away the way that things are voted. It could really kind of help to just get more information. I feel the more details, the better. So even necessarily having something midway through pertaining to that current meeting. Obviously time sensitive, but as you know, some of the meetings, especially on the more passionate subjects, can go heavy and late into the night. So I do understand there needing to be a time for that, but I feel that having it addressed at the beginning of a meeting before any agenda items are able to be voted on is kind of counterproductive.
Well, that knocked one off the mic, so that's good. So you talked about your exchange students as well.
Yes.
So Office Beyond School Time, and I know
Yep.
Dylan went and all of
did,
that kind of
yes.
stuff. So tell me how that affects you.
It's such a great program. I've gotten to host 3 young men from various parts of China, and they stay at my home for several weeks. The school, they shadow the students at the school. They get to really see how American schools work. And the Wareham's Global Ed program is actually hugely well-known throughout the country, actually. We've had some of our educators with Maureen Manning coming up to her and, you know, saying wonderful things about what they've heard about our exchange program, to the point that they're now offering programs with, we've done in the past, but we're going again with Cape Verde. And we have a student staying here from the Netherlands playing for our hockey team, which is huge because they're doing really well. But the fact that these students are coming from all over the world and they want to come to Wareham, they want to work and see how our schools, that says a lot. They could go anywhere. And we've built such relationships with these programs that my son was able to go to Beijing with 4 other students and one of our principals to do a principal exchange and to, you know, see how it is to have their education in China, what differs, what varies, and then present that information to the school committee when they return. So the opportunities for the kids in the town and the girls that went to Australia last year, and they're, I believe, going to Australia again, they've made these relationships, and the Global Ed program is going to be huge for kids that are going to be going to college and then possibly wanting to study abroad and kind of take that where they got it in the Wareham Public Schools and kind of use that throughout the rest of their life. So I think it's an amazing program that we have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mike. Oh, Mary, sorry, I didn't know you
So that being said, what you did, that's definitely a strength. Are there any other strengths in the district that you'd like to share? And what are some of the challenges that you see?
I think that the strength, definitely one of them, is the passion of the teachers that we have in the schools. Having been a sub for 2 years and working side by side with some amazing teachers, as well as being on the PTA, working with some amazing teachers, they go above and beyond. They stay. Some of them don't live that locally, and they just live to teach and to immerse themselves in our kids. I've had my son play Little League games and have their teachers come watch the kids that are in their class, or come to Tigers football games to watch the kids that are, that are in their classes. So they're not just invested in their education, they're invested in their lives. And I think one of the challenges that the district faces is getting some of the parental involvement. I think not necessarily, you always have those families and those parents that you see that it's the same ones you see at every event. It's the same kids you see signing up for every activity or every sport or multi-sport, or, joining in different activities and clubs after school. You see a lot of repetition in those kids, and I think, reaching out to some of those kids or those families that aren't as heavily involved and maybe figuring out why they're not involved. We do have a very diverse community. We do have to be honest, we have a very poverty-stricken community. Our entire school district qualifies for free or reduced lunch based on the number of students that would qualify for it, so the entire town benefits. Most of the town gets the free busing. It was a 25%, I believe, had to pay for busing in that mark. So that just goes to show, percentage-wise, how many of our students are affected by so many things. And I think one of those, the biggest, I wouldn't say obstacle, but that we face is getting some of those families involved. And it's difficult when you have grandparents raising children, or we have a large foster population, and there's a lot of kids that really need that at-home support, and a lot of those families might not know how to give them that support. So I think one of the goals could be to, really try to engage them, and, even if it's through beyond school time or other things, do clinics and class, help them. How can we help you with your homework? How can we, help you, kind of be more involved? Is it a carpool issue? Is it they don't drive issue? You see a lot of that as well, where there are people in town that rely on the GATRA bus, or that don't do the activities because we no longer have late buses or after-school activity buses, which I think would be huge for the district as well to reinstate.
I agree. And the other question I have is, as you know, we've lost a lot of families to charter schools, school choice, private schools. You have any ideas on how to encourage them to come back?
I'm not sure necessarily that getting them to come back should be the main focus. I think the main focus should be getting them to not want to go in the first place. And what I think is there's that middle area that's getting lost, and I believe, and it's not due, like I said in my written remarks, is I don't feel it's the current teachers or administrators or things like that. I think it's a system that's been broken for a while, and what I've heard from other parents is that the middle school seems to get lost in translation. I think hormones and kids finding other activities and, different friend groups, and that's where the cliques start, and that's where kids are really kind of figuring out who they are on their own. I think that kind of bringing the focus more to that level, that's where the kids want to go. Everyone raves about DECUS. They rave about the middle school. I loved DECUS. My son went to DECUS. He did 1 year at Minot. He did, his years at the middle school. He's now at the high school. And from, listening to other parents and friends, that I have several friends that have school choice their children, and it was in the middle school that they're choosing to move on because they're not getting or weren't getting what they felt that their children needed. And And I don't know if that, again, goes back to some of the at-home things. Some of the parents are frustrated with disciplinary issues in years past, or, distractions in the classroom. So they're feeling that their kids, those middle-of-the-road kids, not the dual enrollments or the international baccalaureate kids, it's that middle of the road that really needs to be the focus, because we're focused so much on the advanced and on the failing, that those down the middle are not getting the attention, and I believe that those are the ones that are more likely to school choice.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So I had some prepared questions. I was going to ask you all the same questions. You basically answered my first one to when you answered Lori's
good.
question. Yeah. That you would, it sounds like you would allow, allowing more public participation during the agenda items discussion of the meeting. Yeah. So I appreciate that.
Sure.
So question 2 is a little long-winded, but here it goes.
Okay.
All right. So Wareham actually has 2 school systems. There is Wareham Public Schools, but there's also Upper Cape Cod Regional Technical School, where students, where students choose to go to learn a vocation. While it physically sits in the town of Bourne, Upper Cape is in fact Wareham's vocational school, funded with our tax dollars and complete with 2 school committee members elected by Wareham voters, just like we are.
Mm-hmm.
All right. In the past, staff from Upper Cape have been allowed to come to Wareham Public Schools during the school day to share with 8th graders the opportunities offered at Upper Cape for those who might be interested in choosing a vocational path.
Mm-hmm.
That practice was a source of friction because it was perceived by some as Wareham Public Schools losing kids to another school like we do with school choice, even though that comparison is somewhat apples and oranges for the previously stated reasons. Ultimately, the staff from Upper Cape were restricted to only coming in during after-school hours to discuss their offerings. As a result, Upper Cape stopped coming at all and now only sent out mailings instead. That's a disservice to those kids who would benefit from learning more about opportunities geared toward them that could impact their whole lives. All right. Considering that we allow folks to come in during the school day to make presentations on other worthwhile things, such as the dangers of substance abuse, or even send kids out during the school day to visit area colleges, would you support re-allowing Upper Cape staff to come in one day during the school day to describe what is offered at that school?
I have no issue with that. I look at it this way. I went to a public high school. My brother went to a vocational high school. The same, very similar. My hometown actually very similar demographically and in a way with a struggling school system and funding and things like that. Wareham has reminded me a lot of my hometown, which is why I think I've felt so at home here for the past 9 years. My brother went to Blue Hills Regional Votech. I went to Holbrook High School. I don't believe that the vocational option, especially if it is your region, should count towards school choice. I think that's a separate number. There are definitely a lot of kids that do benefit from a vocational school. That said, I also know that a vocational school, they're also changing the way they operate. A VOTEC used to be where a kid would go to learn a skill because they didn't want to go to college, or they had, maybe they would think about it, they wanted to work first and then maybe go to college, or enlist into the military and have a background of, say, automotive to be able to work in a certain aspect of the military. Things are changed a lot in vocational schools, especially within the last 10 years, where so many of their students, if not most, are going on to, postgraduate education. They're going to college. They've changed their curriculums. They're changing the rules. It used to be that if you struggled in high school, you went to the vocational school because you weren't getting good grades. Now they interview, and if you don't get good grades, you don't get in to the vocational school. So they have changed their criteria a lot, but I also feel that if it is a regional school and we are a part of that with town members on their school committee and with a majority of our, of our students given that option, I don't have any problem of, the kids should be able to have the option and the family should. It could be the thing that keeps them from dropping out of high school. It could help with retention numbers for those kids that need that break, where they need a shop and a week of academics as opposed to straight academics all the time.
So you'd be okay with them coming in during the school day to just show what they have to offer?
Absolutely.
All right, thank you. And I have one more. Oh, before I continue, I do want to thank you for pointing out the passion of the teachers. and it seems to be a theme tonight, and yeah, we have some really passionate teachers, and I think Ms. Bakayaki during the last school committee kind of pointed out how, when Deaconess was giving their presentation, how they were just beaming, and they just do. You just know, that these kids, that these teachers are doing what they were meant to do, All right, so my last question, I think, so just to back up, you were at the last school committee meeting, you saw the presentation regarding, the social promotion. This is regarding that.
Okay.
All right. So, I had to reword it a little bit, but anyway, so, while I believe retentions do need to be done on a case-by-case basis, the fact is that over the course of the past 3 years, and some 3,000 students in grades 3 through 8, Wareham Public Schools has only retained 3 students in that time. However, when these students reach the high school, they are retained in their first year there, 20-plus, 30-plus kids in some years. Yet the middle school, for example, remains in the bottom 20 percentile when compared with the rest of the state. Would you agree that Wareham Public Schools is systemically promoting students to the next grade who have not learned the material, and what would you do to improve that?
Can I just ask a clarifying question
Sure.
to your question? You stated that only 3 students in 3,000 had been retained in Wareham Public Schools, but then stated that once they reached the high school, that there's...
No. So over the course of 3 years, students in grades 3 through 8, and we did the rough math, it was about 3,000 students.
Okay, so from 3 through 8, and
Three.
then once they're at the high, I was just trying to clarify where that went.
So
Okay.
the point being that only 3 students were retained in that whole time out of 3,000 students.
Yep.
But yet, when those year classes make it to the high school, many more are retained because they don't know the
They
material.
weren't ready.
Yeah, they
Okay.
weren't ready. And I think we're setting them up for failure, and I'd just like to hear your thoughts on that.
This is a very sensitive subject for a lot of people, and I can understand why. I feel that we're in an age where everyone is quick to go to social media and complain and post negatively. Everyone is quick to call the news station and post things negatively. And I feel that having been a substitute teacher, and there were things that raised my eyebrows. There were kids that I questioned, without obviously having access to IEPs or 504s or anything that would constitute, a specific accommodation. Things that made me raise my eyebrows of how these children were passing. I assisted with the MCAS alts, working with the TLC classes, and helping to put them together for several of the teachers. There's one instance of a student that I had that would hide in a cupboard and refuse to do work. I came in the next year and he was in the next grade. So there are things, that could have been just the days that I was there. It could have been his Wednesday ritual. I'm not exactly sure because I'm not there every day. I'm there on my day off when I have the ability to be there. But there were things that did make me question why certain kids were pushed through, and I can get seeing that if a child is put through, but if they continue to struggle or continue to fail or continue to be behind, I definitely think, again, it goes back to parent involvement. What is being done? Are these parents being educated on how to help their child? Because I think pulling your child out of school at noon or because they can't handle the full day, then you need to look into a different option, I think, or really have more structured meetings with teachers or classes on how to help them. Our whole goal as an education system is to help these children be able to succeed. And if you're sort of passing the buck, as it will, not necessarily saying that these specific people have done that, you're not doing any service to that child, and essentially you're making an unemployable adult. They're going to get out into the workforce if they make it that far, and they're gonna not want to do anything or not want to put forth any effort because they've never had to. So I don't feel that that's in the best interest of a child. I think it is a case-by-case basis, but I also think that there's definitely a huge opportunity for growth in our district regarding retentions and regarding social promotion. And I think a lot of it comes down to parent education.
Thank you.
What's that?
Yeah.
So my question is pretty short compared to that. Sure. So one of the duties of the school committee is to develop a budget. And so I was just curious if you've had any experience analyzing a budget and if you've had a chance to look at our budget.
I have not had a chance to look at the complete budget, but working with other organizations, working with the Tigers, working with the PTA, dealing with a lot of line items and a lot of financial documents and information, I definitely do have experience kind of looking over the numbers. I'm not an accountant, I'm not a mathematician, I need a calculator, but I'm an adult. I pay rent, I pay bills, I know how things should look, and if things look off, I have no problem questioning them or figuring out, well, if this was the budget this particular year, why is it now this? Or, and vice versa, if it was less and it needs to be more, if it's more and it needs to be less. So I have no problem, looking at numbers and trying to understand why things are done a certain way, balancing and averaging from previous years, and then taking into consideration, changes of costs to adjust for that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All set.
Tony?
Sure.
You talk about changing policies in here. It says your objective is for the betterment of the schools and to have the ability to question and hopefully change those policies and procedures that have not thus far been in the best interest of the kids.
Again, that would
Can
go
you
back
speak a little to that? if
Sure.
you would, please?
I think, again, that goes back to even some of the in-school policies that have parent involvement or have, looking at, say, as Mike said, the retention or the social promotion practices, looking into having more input during a meeting as opposed to just prior to the meeting, as some examples. Not everything necessarily, just anything that seems to not be, the definition of insanity is asking the same, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting the same results, or different results, I'm sorry. And I feel like a lot of times things have been the same for so long, and then we're still questioning why. Why are numbers low? Why are kids school choicing? Why is this? Why is that? With little change. So I think, bringing a fresh perspective may be able to, if it is in fact a policy change, then making those changes, because ultimately we want our district to be successful.
Right. So you think there should be some analysis of that too,
Absolutely.
to determine
Absolutely,
how
because
that's
needs
occurring
change.
and then figure out how to change?
Right, well, in a business, if you own a business and that business is not doing well, you change the way you do business. So if in a school district, it's not doing well and not as much is changing, then maybe it's, to look internally and structurally and see if there is something that maybe other districts are doing or that is more geared towards our kids than just something that's been in the works for, say, 10 years. I mean, technology has changed the way our classrooms have worked. We have Google Classroom now. We have, some of the textbooks. There's not even textbooks anymore. Everything is online. And, there might be policies and procedures that have reference to books or textbooks. And it might be as simple as that, as crossing that out of a budget. If that's the case, why are we budgeting for books that we're not using? It might be something that small, but as an example, it could be something small, but it could make a major difference.
So you think maybe, you talk about the books, do you think it's that they don't know what the inventory of books are?
It very well could
or
be.
Those books need to be updated?
It could be a combination of the two. Or it could be that the books are deemed obsolete because some of the information in them is no longer relevant because
Sure.
Wikipedia updated it yesterday. So I think we definitely need to, kind of catch up to the times, I think, and see if any of those changes are something that are going to help our kids succeed. If a kid's face is stuck in a tablet and you send him home with a book, what do you think he's going to be more apt to do? Is he going to stay on that tablet or is he going to touch the book? So, I think we just need to really look at who the kids are now as opposed to maybe who they were when some of these things were instituted.
Could I just interject, just, Tony, so you understand? So there is a policy manual, the school committee, school department has a policy manual, and those policies are reviewed on a rotating basis. So that is being done. Okay, just so you know. Thanks.
Mary?
I did have a question, but you already answered it, so I'll just say thank you for stepping up.
Thank you.
It's about time.
Thank you.
Peter?
Yeah, I'll stick with essentially the same question. Discipline in the Wareham schools has been an issue ever since I was in the Wareham schools many, many years ago. Very often, I think parents yank their kids out of the Wareham schools for no other reason that they don't want their kids going to school with, quote-unquote, those kids. What would you do to try to empower teachers or assist teachers to create a better controlled classroom environment so that the teachers can concentrate on teaching and be more successful in that, and the kids can concentrate on learning and in turn be more successful learning?
I think a big portion of the discipline problems stem from outside of the school. Most of the kids I've witnessed either misbehaving or what have you have issues at home. There's a large foster population. There's a large population of grandparents raising their kids. These kids are, I think, for the most part, acting out because they don't know any other way. I think, again, it goes back to having the teachers and the administration work with the parents or work with the guardians and figure out, okay, well, if your child is, repetitively having disciplinary issues, varying from class disruption to physical altercations to bullying, I think, that the parent should be required for the child to, almost take part in not necessarily an intervention, that's not really the word that I'm going for, but the parent needs to be educated too. And I know that it's hard with working parents and, people sometimes are holding down multiple jobs. As a single parent, I understand it's difficult to find time but your kid needs to be first. If you want your kid to succeed and your legacy is your child, you don't want that legacy to be tainted and to be disruptive. And a lot of it is kids act different around different people. But one of the more common things that I noticed of those kids that were the disciplinary issues, at least during the days that I was at, say, the middle school, was their lack of fear or respect for those in authority. I know that it was night and day coming into the middle school this year under Tracy Cote than it was under Dr. Stedman, for example. She seems to have really, when I was there in the fall, seems to have really kind of curtailed a lot of that. I don't know if some of those kids are now no longer in the district. I don't know if some of those kids are in better at-home situations or what they are, but I think a lot of it is the at-home piece that needs to be addressed. Teachers can only do so much. And if a parent is continuously sending their child to school expecting the teachers to parent their children, that's the problem.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We've gone way past the time, I'm all set. She's answered plenty of questions.
Yeah. I'm not gonna ask my question. My question is really technical and it really requires, prior experience. I'm not gonna go there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
My pants.
Yeah, don't do that.
Oh, don't do that.
That's kind of more than we needed to know. That's
Yeah,
all.
I got a puppy that's been doing that, so I don't
Oh, boy.
need anybody else doing it.
When you reach over 70, it comes all the time.
Tell Jeff to cool until Mary comes back.
Yeah.
Jeff, we're taking a brief break to allow one of our members to
But you can
take
come
care
up-
of business, if you
You
will.
can come up
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I'm pleased to be able to say I know all of you reasonably well and appreciate the service that you give to the community. I will tell you first off that I guess it's literally essentially 20 years that I decided it was time to give back, and specifically give back to Wareham. I was actually still working at the time, but I retired in 2001 and chose the Finance Committee, as Patrick knows well.
I remember.
A long time ago, Patrick.
Remember when you showed up?
And it was a natural choice for me because I've always been comfortable with numbers and finances, and it seemed like the best way to figure out what the town was all about. And I was right. And after 6 years, as all of you probably know, you have to get off the Finance Committee. It was an easy decision for me to aspire to the school committee because I'd actually spent a couple of years in public education, so to speak. I say so to speak because it was charter schools. Charter schools didn't mean anything to me other than it was a job. And it was a very interesting job. I was president of a charter school company that had charter schools in multiple states. But I learned enough to know I didn't like charter schools. And fortunately, the company that I had merged with a larger company, and I was out of a job and said, okay, time to retire and do some of the things that I couldn't do when I was working. One of those things was, of course, was coach a tennis team, but the other thing was things like Finance Committee and School Committee. I greatly admire, don't even know how people who are working full-time managed to actually do the school committee or the Board of Selectmen position, but I have great admiration for it. I guess the most important thing you should understand is the passion that I felt in 1999 is still there. I'm actively involved in other boards and other things, but public education is still, and that youngest generation is still incredibly important to me. So that's why, the most important reason why I'm here. The other reasons, I guess, fall into the category of, I think I've learned some things over the last 12 years or 4 terms that I believe would add value to the school committee, whether it's for 2 months or longer than 2 months. Specifically, I think I've gotten to know exactly how things operate at the state level. As recently as this afternoon, I got an email from the executive director of the Association of School Committees. I'm no longer on the board of directors because when you're off the school committee, you obviously get off that associations. And somehow he heard that I might be getting back on, and he said, "Are you back on?" Because he wants me to get back involved with something that I am, thanks to the support from other people and my friends. I'm actually now a life member of that association, but whether I get back on that association board of directors or not is really not important because I have all the contacts that I need to make sure I understand fully what's going on. School funding is still incredibly important. We almost made a breakthrough last year with the legislature. I think we're closer to a breakthrough now than we were last year because the governor has decided that it's something he wants to be involved in. The recent cherry sheets, notwithstanding, meaning for next year, were a disappointment, at least a disappointment to me. It looks like it's first go-round, governor, it's early. It's only about a positive 50,000 for the town of Wareham. But that's a tiny fraction of what we could get if we did true school reform. I've gotten to meet Jeff Riley in a small group dinner, and I think he has the capacity to be an outstanding commissioner of education. I've met Secretary Pizer. I don't think as much of him as I think of Mr. Riley. Mr. Pizer is a major fan of charter schools, and I could go into all the reasons why I do not believe in charter schools. But the simplest way of expressing it, and then I'll move on, is the fact that every result you hear from a charter school is tainted by something called adverse selection, which is an economics term, but it basically means they don't take every kid who's in the community. They take kids who apply, and that by definition means it's an adverse selection process, and all their results are tainted as a result of that. Secretary Pizer, when I confronted him with that on a one-on-one discussion, didn't have a good response, which told me all I needed about him, meaning that he's a political appointee and people want him to aspire, people want him to increase the number of charter schools. What's going on in New Bedford, by the way, is a really interesting thing, because for the first time they may actually have a cooperative agreement between the district and a very successful charter school, Alma Del Mar. We'll see what happens with that. Anyway, so at the state level, I feel very comfortable that I know the players, that I have contacts with the players, and that certainly includes our representative and our state senator. And I can pick up the phone, call these people, and may or may not be able to get what Wareham needs, but at least I can get our voice heard. And I think that's incredibly important. The other thing that I think I can add value to is, I think you all know that the school committee member has 3 responsibilities. One is policy, although we have that responsibility, but a tremendous number of the important policies are actually written by the state. And then they send them to us and they say, please pass this and don't change the language. So I can't think of too many policies over the 12 years that have been really significant in terms of the education of our children. The budget is obviously an incredibly important document. We're still in the next 2 months will be an important part of that process, and I think I can add value because I participated with 12 budgets and been on the superintendent's advisory committee for the budget many years. So I hope to be able to add value there as well. And then the other thing that I think I can add value is I think I have a really good understanding of what makes public education so difficult. There are 2 parts to what I want to tell you about what I've learned. One is, yes, it's true that the school committee has the authority to hire and fire the superintendent, evaluate the superintendent, et cetera. But the truth is the law has been written in such a way as once we've hired that individual, and for that matter, once a principal is hired, this problem is the same for the superintendent as it is for the school committee. You are now in a position where the law says don't interfere. You are not, as a school committee member, supposed to have much of an impact at all on what happens actually in the schools and in the classroom. So you might say, well, yeah, but if they don't do what you want them to do, just fire them. Well, that kind of attitude is incredibly destructive, and it also doesn't do anything for the education of our children. So my attitude about working as a school committee member for actually quite a number of years now is try to come up with something that will persuade, and I underline the word persuade, the people that you know who are educators in the system. And I made a point of not only having a positive, constructive relationship with the superintendent, but also with the principals and even the assistant principals and the department heads. There are very few of them who don't know who I am, who I don't feel comfortable going up to them and having a conversation and talking about what is important to them, how the year is going. It literally happened today. Not because I was at a bus driver in service, but that's another point. But the point is that when you interact with an educator, don't think you can get very far by simply saying, I'm on the school committee, this is what I think you ought to do, okay? That simply does not work, and the law doesn't want you to do that, even if it did work. Now, the question then becomes, well, if your role is to persuade, how do you make progress? Well, depending on your background, and we have a wide variety of backgrounds on our school committee, you do have some value that you can add because of your experience. And the good leaders, the good superintendents, the good principals, even the assistant principals and department heads do want good ideas. They just don't want to be told, do it. Here's my example of why I think public education is uniquely difficult. I want you to imagine that you're a parent with a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old, or maybe twin 5-year-olds. And you have 2 appointments today. You manage to take off for a day, cost you some money perhaps, you work 2 jobs, you barely have time to be the parent you want to be, but you're doing the best you can and you have 2 appointments. One is you want to go see Mrs. Chandler at the Deacon School and enroll your child in kindergarten. The other appointment is with a pediatrician, okay, because your child isn't feeling particularly well, okay? Maybe they're 4 years old. They're not in pre-K. Why aren't they in pre-K? Well, because they're not a SPED kid, which is what half our pre-K kids are, and you don't have the money to pay for the pre-K. So there you are with a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old. You take your 5-year-old to Mrs. Chandler, and they do their pre-testing to see how your kid is doing. And after the pre-testing, Mrs. Chandler or her assistant principals, someone comes up to you and says, you know, you may not be aware of, but your child not only doesn't know how to read, he or she doesn't know his or her letters. In fact, when we handed her a book, she couldn't even orient the book in a way to read it. Now, if that seems foreign to you, it's not foreign to the educators at Deacon School. They run into the problem of kids literally not knowing how to hold a book to read it, and they absolutely don't know their letters, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, that's one of your children. And okay, I will conclude relatively quickly. The second child goes to your pediatrician, Wareham Pediatrics, and she's told, and the mother's told, your child has type 1 diabetes. Terrible diagnosis, right? But guess what? How you practice, the best practice for dealing with type 1 diabetes is absolutely known. And in fact, if that pediatrician doesn't handle your child well, you'll just sue them, okay? Because the best practice is absolutely known. But what is the best practice for taking that child who's never held a book and getting them to read? And the answer is, it doesn't exist. There are best practices, and I think we're making great strides in doing something at DECUS about that child, those children who don't know how to read. But in fact, there are simply best practices. And what is the best practice is an opinion that every educator has. As a school committee member, all you can do is almost sympathize with what it's like to try and handle that child or those children. But that's why public education is so difficult. It took me a while to realize this. It took me a while to realize the kind of role that I could play that would add value to all these educators. But that's why I'm in front of you. And I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thanks. Go ahead, Laurie.
I'm good right this second.
Okay.
I want to hear, yeah, good right this second.
Okay. Mary?
Sure, I'm going to ask you the questions that I asked the other 2.
That's fair.
That's what I figure. So tell me what you think the strengths and challenges are in this district.
Well, I'll start with the strengths. And I'm happy to say that it's stronger now than it was a decade ago. I am now very comfortable recommending that a parent send their child to Wareham High School. I think the increased rigor, the increased I've been in healthcare too long, increased student-centered curriculum, okay, that IB has offered, and the fact that the math department has been turned around in the last 3 or 4 years has Plus, I always think, I've always thought that there are good things happening in science and history. I also even like, although I know they're stretched, what's happening in special education. Andrea Cannon does a wonderful job and is passionate about her kids at the high school. So I think the high school is now first rate, and I won't tell you a quick story. It's a wonderful story, but I'll tell you later if I have time. I was not comfortable with the middle school literally as recently as last year. I felt, I used the word incorrigible, I remember in one school committee meeting, and felt very uncomfortable recommending that someone send their child to the middle school. The really good news is that I have heard from multiple sources that under the leadership of Tracy Cote, 5 through 7 has turned around. And I am thrilled that that has happened. The staff are happy, even the bus drivers are happy with what's going on in the middle school. So I now think it's becoming, 1 year is one data point, but it's becoming a strength for us. And let's face it, every middle school is a really difficult place for a variety of reasons that we all know very well. I don't know 3 through 5 nearly as well as I know the other grades. And so I'll admit a weakness in terms of being able to say whether that's a strength or not. I have seen a lot of really interesting data over the last couple of years, and in fact, I've been blessed to have seen some recent data about what's going on in the Deacon's School, especially with literacy. It's early. They've only been using Carrie Thurston for a couple of years. I know some of the educators are incredibly excited at the results they're getting. And this is exactly on point with that child that comes and doesn't even know how to hold a book. There's some indication that we may have figured out what is at least one of the best practices about what is happening at Deacon's School. So those are our strengths. Weaknesses, and maybe this is going to sound foreign for a public school district, but as I look at the cherry sheets over the last 10 years and as recently as the one we're going to be dealt because it just came out today, we are still losing literally $2 million more to charter schools and school choice than we did 11 years ago. And that's because people are choosing to send their kids somewhere else. It's a huge weakness for us that we have not changed that perception. Everybody has a responsibility, not just school committee members, but particularly school committee members, has the responsibility to try to change that perception, A, because it's wrong, and B, because it hurts this town financially tremendously. So I would have said aging elementary schools was a weakness. But thanks to the voters of this community, it is no longer a weakness, and we can look forward to an outstanding building for our pre-K through, well, at least 4, and we'll see what the grade configuration looks like when that school is ultimately built. So that was probably a long-winded answer, but it was an important question.
It answers my question. And then it sort of leads into my other question, which is, as you were saying, we've lost a lot of families to school choice, charter schools, and private schools. So what are some of your thoughts on getting them back or preventing them from going?
There's no question that if we can get parents of kindergarten and first and second graders raving about the literacy that their children are having, that's going to make a huge difference, because people think of our losses at 9 through 12, but in fact we're losing kids to the Bourne elementary school system as well. And so if we could stop that, that would be a great thing to do. And of course, if they continued on after first and second grade and never left, that would be a great long-term solution. So I think we need to really have a lot more data points, but I'm excited about the possibility of that being one of the ways of getting people back, and more importantly, never losing them.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this is the right time. I had an opportunity, I won't go into all the details, a homeschool child, homeschooled for 5 years, a child, and the family lives in Rochester. And for reasons that I won't go into, they decided not to look at Old Rochester, but decided to look at Wareham. And the kid tested in incredibly high, is now, believe it or not, she's a 12-year-old doing 9th grade work. But the most important thing is her mother's raving about the education that she's getting at Wareham High School, and she lives in Rochester and could be going to Old Rochester. So those are the kind of stories that have a geometric impact, because she'll tell others, her child will tell others. As recently as today, I saw her, and she was raving about her teachers. And this is a 12-year-old raving about her teachers. So I think it's a really long ocean liner turning process, but I think word of mouth plays a tremendous role. I think ultimately when we get a few IB graduates, diplomas awarded, that will start to have an impact, because they're very hard to get once, except for Sturgis, which of course is usually full, and there's a waiting list. And so I don't have a great answer, but I think it's a long process that we are beginning, and we just, every time we hear something negative, we have to have the knowledge to counter it with something positive.
So just because he brought up about a 12-year-old, you said, is at
Yes.
the high school right now?
Yes.
So it sort of relates to a question that Mike is going to ask you, but in the opposite way. So what do you think of that, of a 12-year-old being at the high school?
Well, I will tell you what the mother thinks. The mother has decided that, remember, this is a homeschooled kid, she's going to take just enough classes so that she can stay registered, but she's going to take her time getting through our high school, because she does not want her kid to graduate 2 years ahead of her friends. I think that probably makes a tremendous amount of sense for most kids, but I have learned a long time ago that don't get it between parents and their children as to what's best for their kids. In this particular case, I admire the decision, because the easy decision would have been, great, in 4 years she can move on to college, et cetera, et cetera. These parents, because I met both of them, are very concerned that the maturity is a 12-year-old maturity. Just because her head is intellectually far ahead academically doesn't mean she's emotionally ready to be gone in 4 years, and when she's 16. So I think it's right for this child, and I'll let parents decide what's right for their children.
Thank you.
Can I, I'm sorry. I'm ready now. Before. So, I mean, one of the women, either of the women who were here earlier will be sitting on the board as they're running for the 2-year seat. And so yours could be 2 months, yours could be 3 years. We don't know. So do you have short-term goals for just the next couple of months for you?
Yes, I specifically would like to add value to the budget process, to make sure we get the best possible budget that the town and the state allows. I think realistically, that's probably all I can expect to do in 2 months. My longer-term goals, assuming I'm elected, are much more in the areas that I've talked about. But if I can be helpful in the budget process for 2 months, and whatever the other subject that comes up where I've had experience where I can add value.
Thank you.
I think it's realistic. I don't think I can jump on.
Yeah, that's why I asked. I think
Okay.
that's perfect.
Okay. Mike?
Every-
Good to see you again, Jeff.
You too.
So I had some questions prepared. I'm going to take this out of order because they brought it up. And it kind of goes with what you've been talking about. So I'll go with my last question first. So you were here at the last meeting when we were discussing the social promotion and such, and like everybody was here, and I'm glad that you guys came, and that was good to see. So this question is about that. All right. So while I believe that retentions do need to be done on a case-by-case basis, the fact is that over the course of the past 3 years and some 3,000 students in grades 3 through 8, Wareham Public Schools has only retained 3 students in that time. However, when these students reach the high school, many are retained in their first year there, 20-plus kids, 30-plus kids. Yet the middle school, for example, remains in the bottom 20 percentile when compared with the rest of the state. Would you agree that Wareham Public Schools is systemically promoting students to the next grade who have not yet learned the material, and what would you do to improve that?
First, I was at the meeting. As much as it was perhaps frustrating for every school committee member and every educator that was on this side of the table, I applaud the fact that the discussion took place. Not every discussion is going to feel good at the end. This is to me a perfect example where I need to sublimate my own intellect to the educators. And what do I mean by that? There's a part of me that says sending people on when they have very little chance of being successful is almost immoral. But sending people on, but holding people back when the data says, and I'm a big believer in data, when the data says that the likelihood of them dropping out increases dramatically because they have been retained, is an awful solution. I believe the data said if you hold them back twice, they're like 100% likely to drop out, and it was like 30 or 40% if you held them back once. Now, so to me, it's a terrible choice to give a superintendent, a principal, an educator. They have made the decision to cross their fingers and hope that by the time they get to Mr. Palladino, they have matured enough so that they will have a chance of getting through high school and moving on. I'm a tennis coach, and sometimes I look at a player and I said, are you playing by prayer? And that's my way of saying, don't rely on luck to win a point, okay? Make the effort, okay? So to me, the idea of crossing your fingers and hoping is an awful way to manage a school district. And therefore, since the alternative is almost equally unpalatable to me, meaning just, crossing your fingers and hoping, as compared to retaining them and being almost sure that they're going to be dropping out. To me, the only solution is to fix K through 2. Literally. So you don't have to make that choice, because both choices to me are unacceptable. Retaining kids that you know are going to end up dropping out is unacceptable, and pushing kids through when you know that they are going to be, in all likelihood, unsuccessful in the middle school especially, is also unacceptable to me. So when I'm faced with two unacceptable choices, I look for a third. And to me, what we're doing in K through 2 right now has promise to prevent our educators from having to choose between those two unacceptable solutions.
So fixing K through 2 and then crossing your fingers.
No.
And then,
No. By my definition of fixing K through 2 is that no one will get to 3rd grade without knowing how to read. That's my definition.
Okay.
Now, if this fixing still results in a small handful of kids who can't read by the time they get to 3rd grade, I would retain them. I'd create a 2.5 or a 1.5 or something like that, because that means that, and of course this may mean we need money, but that means that the intervention has not been pointed enough, has not been individualized enough to work for those small number of kids. My problem is that when we tried to do RTI in this school district, we failed because the percentage of kids that were on grade level was so small. So that said to me, the fundamental problem we haven't fixed is K through 2.
I would argue that we failed in RTI because we didn't do RTI. We half-baked it. Half of the people were interventionists, half of them were instructional leaders. We didn't do it right.
Well, the problem is that RTI assumes a certain percentage of your kids are at a certain level. And when they're not, and you don't have the resources to provide the interventions to get those kids to the right level, it's going to fail. Period. End of story. I don't think you and I are on the different page, because I do agree that crossing your fingers and pushing kids through is a bad idea. But when the number of kids that you could be pushing through is so high, that means you failed in K-1-2. And I do not believe we can afford to continue to fail. And the good news is, I think there's an indication that really good things are happening based on the data that I've seen.
Okay.
Time will tell. But it's an important topic.
All right, question one. I'm just gonna, this is question two to you, but this is how I ask the questions to everybody else. It's all the same question. All right, so in 2017, the school committee decided to change the 15-minute portion of the beginning of our meetings from, quote, public participation to, quote, public comment. The difference sounds trivial, but it's actually significant. Prior to that, the public could come before the school committee and not only comment, but actually engage the committee with questions and hopefully get answers. Now all they can do is offer comment, and we just listen and don't respond. Would you support allowing more involvement of the public at school committee meetings where people are actually welcome not only to comment, but ask questions during discussions on agenda items with a reasonable time limit set, say 2 minutes?
Well, let me say at the outset that I love hearing from people, whether it's emails or at our school committee meetings. Any way they communicated with me over the last 12 years was I was happy to receive those, and I responded to every single one of them. If we could figure out a way, well, let me back up. Extemporaneous responses can be dangerous. And by dangerous, I mean you could end up having a school committee member feeling like they needed to respond, and then responding in a way that in retrospect, after they're driving home that night thinking, I should have given that more thought. And so I'm concerned about extemporaneous responses to important questions. And frequently, these are really important topics that are brought up. So I guess I would tend to err on the side of making sure that people felt welcome, that people would feel completely free to ask anything, comment on anything, but I would prefer for the responses to be thoughtful and thought out rather than extemporaneous, because I think that the public deserves us to, when we make a response, to not 2 weeks later say, I've changed my mind. And I think we run that risk when we give extemporaneous responses.
And so when you say you think it would be fine for, people to ask or comment whatever they want, is that just during the beginning or throughout the agenda items?
I think you open up a serious time problem. We have had many times when we've gone past 10 o'clock without this change. If a majority of the committee could construct something that I felt was not going to significantly lengthen the meetings, I guess I would be open to it. What I'm not open to is extemporaneous responses. But if people wanted to make comments during our deliberations, it sounds a little chaotic to me. I'd have to make sure it was a really thoughtful policy. But I can't sit here and say I'm adamantly opposed to it, but I guess I'm a little concerned.
And so it's interesting, just to, as a sort of an aside, you mentioned going beyond 10 o'clock. I didn't follow all the school.
We're not quite there yet.
I didn't follow all the school committee meetings when I wasn't on, but when I was on, obviously, I can't recall a single meeting going past 10 o'clock with the current superintendent. Not that it would be.
Oh, they did. Trust me.
Okay.
Michelle can tell you.
All right, because I can remember many going past that, with the prior superintendent, but it's just the way the agenda was set up. But it was just interesting that these meetings do go quicker. But it's just an aside. All right. I have one more.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm just going to read it. All right. So Wareham actually has two school systems. There's Wareham Public Schools, but there's also Upper Cape Cod Regional Technical School where students choose to go to learn a vocation. While it physically sits in the town of Bourne, Upper Cape is in fact Wareham's vocational school, funded with our tax dollars and complete with 2 school committee members elected by Wareham voters, just like we are. In the past, staff from Upper Cape have been allowed to come to the Wareham Public Schools during the school day, to share with 8th graders the opportunities offered at Upper Cape for those who might be interested in choosing a vocational path. That practice was a source of friction because it was perceived by some as Wareham Public Schools losing kids to another school like we do with school choice, even though the comparison is somewhat apples and oranges for the previously stated reasons. Ultimately, the staff from Upper Cape were restricted to only coming in during after school hours, to discuss their offerings. As a result, Upper Cape stopped coming at all and now only send out mailings instead. That's a disservice to those kids who would benefit from learning more about opportunities geared toward them that could impact their whole lives. Considering that we allow folks to come in during the school day to make presentations on other worthwhile things such as the dangers of substance abuse, or we even send kids out during the day to visit area colleges, would you support re-allowing Upper Cape staff to come in one day during the school day to describe what is offered at that school?
So I'll give you the short answer, and then if you'll permit me an explanation. The short answer is yes. Because despite the unfortunate politics and competition between the 2 schools, there's no way that we should be sacrificing any child, which is ultimately what we're doing by not exposing them, to an opportunity that they may very well benefit from. My big problem with Upper Cape is not the fine education that they offer kids there. My big problem is that as a result of, I guess, primarily MCAS, they feel that they need to have the best possible MCAS scores coming out of that school. So they consciously take the best possible kids they can get. Best possible behavior, best possible grades, best possible attendance. And the result is that they get great kids. In fact, one year they took half our honor roll out of the 8th grade. So the real question is that what vocational schools was intended to do? And in my mind, we are literally, speaking of sacrificing kids, I'm sure there are some kids who in middle school would get a great education and do very well at Upper Cape and just don't happen to be doing well academically, and maybe they're acting out. Good grief, middle school acting out. What an amazing thought, right? And all of a sudden, because of their behavior and attendance and grades, they don't even get the opportunity to be considered at Upper Cape. That to me is unacceptable. So I have 2 unacceptable things. I have one, competition between 2 schools, which is sacrificing kids, and also an admissions policy, which by law could be a lottery, but they specifically choose not to make it a lottery, because if they did, they might not get the best possible kids out of our middle school. I have spoken to Mr. Deutsch about this. I've spoken to his predecessor about this. It's a hot topic, if you can't tell. For me, I don't like the status quo, but the short answer is the last thing I would do is sacrifice kids being exposed to something that might be beneficial to them.
Yeah, I think you and I could finish each other's sentences on that, the politic part of it, on the cherry picking, and yeah, it's tough. It puts our high school at a tough position. But I like that you do agree that we should go back to the way it was and have these kids at least see the opportunity, because we can wring our hands about all this.
Bedford is going through the same politics with greater voc tech.
Yeah, we can wring our hands about how unfair it is, but it's about the kids. And
Yes,
the kids.
I completely agree. It's about the kids.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so my question, as you know, one of the jobs of the school committee is to formulate a budget. And so I know you know that. So I guess my only question for you is, have you had a chance or the opportunity to look at our current budget?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we can leave it at that.
That was the quickest answer you've
Yes.
ever given for anything.
Or you can elaborate.
Quickest answer
if
I've
you
heard
would
tonight.
like.
There you go.
That's
I
fine.
mean, I'm happy to elaborate, but that is not what you asked me.
No, you're right, you're
Yeah,
right.
no, that's all right.
So considering the time, I won't ask him to elaborate, okay?
I went over it in detail.
All right, thank you. Yes.
Tony? Mary?
I have gotten more information tonight than I have in a long time, so.
That's the reason I don't know.
Welcome to Jeff.
Questions at this time.
Okay.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, I'll give you the one that I gave the others. Since I was a kid in the Wareham schools, the chief issue for a lot of kids and a lot of parents is discipline within the schools, and especially classroom discipline. It was a problem when I was in the schools. I think for some people it remains a problem. I think one of the big reasons that causes a lot of the kids to school choice out or seek other alternatives is the fact that parents don't want their kids going to school with, quote, those kids. And I'm just wondering what sort of ideas you might have to try to improve the discipline in the classroom, give the teachers a little bit more control over what happens in the classroom, and assist them in maintaining an orderly classroom so that they can teach and the kids can learn.
Well, the good news is there's been significant improvement on that issue in the middle school in the last year. I have had some of my tennis players essentially say the same thing that you just said. My goal is to never to take a CP class so I don't have to be in a class with them. Okay? So it still exists. But my belief is, it's amazing how things sort of tie together. My belief is that some of those kids, they're not bad kids, they're just very frustrated with their ability to learn, and they're also frustrated with the fact that they're learning things that they don't really feel they need to learn. I asked one of my tennis kids recently why she chose to go to Upper Cape. And her answer was, this is a quote, because I want to be in the plumbers union. Now, nothing wrong with that, right? Great answer. But this is a 15-year-old who's already decided that, okay? So if you've decided you wanted to be in the plumbers union at age 15, and instead of being at Upper Cape learning plumbing, you're frustrated with the fact that you're being forced to learn something that you don't care about, you may not be the world's most model student. In addition, if you're literally not reading on grade level, you're also going to be a very frustrated acting out student, which gets back to the whole issue of where you just pushed to Mr. Palladino and now you're a behavior problem in the high school. So this thing really does tie together. If kids are where they're supposed to be and they have the capacity to learn based on what they've learned the years before, what they're being taught now, then I believe the vast, vast majority of behavior discipline problems will disappear. I just do. And am I a raving optimist? Well, I hope I am an optimist, but I don't think I'm a raving optimist because I think there's reason to believe that what I'm saying is true.
Well, I'm going to let you, I'm going to not add any more to this, although you, going back 20-something years ago, you certainly are answering questions very similarly over the years. It's always been your very methodical thinking that was always a very good thing, in my opinion. I remember when you were on the Finance Committee, we always depended on that, so I appreciate that.
Well, I'll take that as a compliment. Thank you.
It is a compliment. So I think I've heard enough tonight. It's only a 2-month appointment.
That's crazy, isn't it?
We're not going to solve all the school problems in 2 months.
Yeah.
so.
No, that I can guarantee.
Jeff, I'm not going to ask anything simply because my question you would be able to answer, and the other two really didn't have the skills because they don't have the background, so I'm going to pass.
Understood.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
couple different ways we can go on this. We gotta be able to hear you. No, you don't. All of you. I know, I love you too, Bob. There's a couple different ways we can go with this. This really should be individuals making their own decision and just voting. We can sit here and discuss things, but the problem is we're discussing people directly, and there shouldn't be any discussion about personalities, et cetera. It's just I feel someone has better skill than the others, but I think we've spent enough time, unless someone wants to do something differently.
Yeah.
You know, we just sit and vote.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? Are you looking for like a motion, or are we just going one by one?
I think we just go one by one. If you want, you can go by motion.
But you know what, then we can make a ratified vote afterwards.
Yes.
Just let's get an idea first, because if you take a vote and it doesn't go anywhere, then we gotta do
Perfect.
something
Yeah.
different.
Yeah.
At least we'll have an idea where we're going, right?
Yeah, I would just do a poll vote.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I don't
Perfect.
think we really should be sitting there trying to influence each other.
No, I agree.
And, you know, we don't wanna discuss these people's
No.
No.
individual character or whatever in the, you know what I mean? It's just not right.
I mean, this
And we,
I like that he doesn't like you
and we
more than
want
me.
them, and the press is sitting here besides.
Yeah.
And what we want them to do is, we want them all to run, and,
Yeah.
you know, it'll
Yeah.
all get figured out in the end, you know,
Exactly.
by the people.
I'll make one other comment. I went to the clerk's office this morning, and I wasn't able to get a hold of Mary Ann. I'm going to ask, just for fairness, on the ballot that comes out for the April election, that the people running for the two-year term, if we happen to pick one of those two for this particular place right now, that there's nothing listed as an incumbent going forward, because I had a problem. That's one of the reasons I really didn't want to appoint anybody right now for 2 months, because I thought it would be an unfair advantage. So where we have one person running for the 3-year, that's fine, that's out of the mix. But the two running for the 2,
Yeah.
if they are put in and the clerk says they have to be the incumbent, that's,
I don't know that they can do that. I think state law determines.
I know, but I'm going to ask if it's possible, strictly because it is an advantage.
Now,
Go ahead, Mike.
are you looking for us to blurt out a name, or can we have a little, preamble, or?
No, I just think it's simply, we all
just-
are
Okay.
at a point in time, we've been elected to do something,
Yeah.
it's simply just, who you
Thank you.
prefer.
All right, so do you want, I guess, I wish I could have a little more comment, but I'll just say, I'm probably April Rossi.
Okay, Mary?
So I'm actually going to go with Jeff Sweat, because I go back to where it gives, if I pick one of the others, it gives them an advantage.
Understand?
I would also go with Jeff.
Okay.
Jeff Sweat.
Tony?
Jeff.
April.
April.
Yeah, you know, I was kind of toying with this, but I'm gonna go with Jeff, and I'll tell you why. It's because I believe that he can help out through the budget process this time around,
It's okay.
It's just 2 months, yeah.
That's it, that's 5.
right out of the gate, so.
No,
I agree.
The answer is Jeff.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we can have the 3 people come back in and just thank them and let
Yes,
them know.
yes, thank you.
Hope everybody enjoyed this.
Jennifer went 2.5 hours ago.
I know, I feel bad
Out
about
there for
that.
so long.
Oh, just come up front and we just want to announce, we've made our decision after everybody spoke. I'd like to thank all 3 of you for, making the effort, et cetera, and we appreciate it very much. We basically, everybody's voted individually. We didn't have any discussion internally, just so it was straightforward, everybody made their own decision. And once we hit 5, that was majority, and this particular group was picked Jeff for the 2 months. And again, thank you all.
But yes, I would like to take the opportunity to say thank you very much for coming forward, and
I
Thank you,
look
and
forward to
Thank you.
serving with one of you ladies.
we're looking forward to a spirited race.
yes.
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 Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
guys.
Folks.
Thank you.
The sheet I handed out to everybody has
This-
people's personal information.
This one?
Yeah, do
The
me a favor.
one I wrote all
Take
of?
it home and please destroy.
Oh, do I have to eat it?
No, I don't want you either, because.
Yeah, nobody's getting
Don't
We
much.
flush
actually
either,
already
it's
have
not-
this,
yeah.
too,
I know,
so
but
we'll
just-
No, we'll destroy it.
What happens is
dog
in
will
this
take
room here,
care
people have a tendency to leave stuff here.
Oh, I know.
That's
Yeah,
the issue.
move to adjourn.
And your second? All in favor?
Aye.
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 And then you have to do your own.
Yes, we have to have our own motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Well,
Second.
All those in favor?
We can't say
Aye.
anything. We're out of session.
Thank you.
Kidding.